Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to another Sister for Sister Story Time session. This is a continuance of the defilement of Dinah and the sacrifice of the firstborn. Stay with me now. I will also be talking about Jephthah and his daughter's sacrifice in the Bible. So please, um, I know I talk a little fast, read a little fast, just try to keep up. All right. Okay, so this is an article titled Esau, Hathor, the Red Heifer, and the Conflict in Palestine. The biblical story of Isaac's twin sons, Esau, Edom, and Jacob, describes how Esau became the patriarch of the Edomites. According to the Bible, um, the land of Edom was occupied by a people known as Horites, who were descendants of their patriarch Seir. According to Wikipedia, Horites or Horim were a people mentioned in the Torah, Genesis 14 and 6, 36:20, Deuteronomy 2 and 12, inhabiting areas around Mount Seir, which was in Canaan, Genesis 36, 2 and 5. Mount Seir seems to have been named after one Seir, who the land of the Horites, the land of Seir, was named after, Genesis 14 and 6. He was the ancestor of the Horite chiefs listed in Genesis 36 and 20. The Horites have been identified with references in Egyptian inscriptions to Khar, Khar, formerly translated as Harai or Harry, Harri, which concern a southern region of Canaan. See the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, page 1421, James Orr, 1915. Despite the widespread influence of the Hurrians, a more northern people, these were probably not the same as the Horites. The first mention of the Horites in the Torah was when they were defeated by a coalition of eastern kings led by the Chedorlaomer of Elam, a province in modern Iran. These kings had come through the Horite territory to subdue a rebellion by a coalition of other kings of peoples whom they had ruled for 12 years, who were living near the Salt Sea or the Dead Sea and Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 14, 1 through 12. Later, according to Genesis 36, the Horites coexisted and intermarried with the family of Esau, grandson of Abraham through Isaac, Genesis 25, 21 through 25. They were eventually brought under the rule of the descendants of Esau, also then known as Edom. The ancestry of Seir, the Horite, is not specified. Pre-Edomite Horite chiefs, descendants of Seir, are listed in Genesis 36, 20 through 29, and 1 Chronicles 1, 38 through 42. One of these chiefs, Zibeon, is also described as a Hivite. Esau's wife, Oholibamah, was his granddaughter. Oholibamah bat Anna bat Zibeon ben Seir, Genesis 36 and 2, 24 and 25. Their three sons all became chiefs, although unlike other sons of Esau, they are not called chiefs in Edom. Compare Genesis 36 and 16, 17 with 36 and 18. This may indicate a transition time in which only certain Horite areas were becoming known as Edom. The chiefs who descended from Esau are listed in Genesis 36, 40 through 43. Two of these chiefs would appear to have been female, Timnah and Aholibamah. At some time, certain of these leaders rose to the level of kings over the other chiefs, and the Horite land became known as Edom rather than the land of Seir. One example of these kings is Jobab, son of Zerah, a son of Esau, and his wife Basemath or Basemath, who was Ishmael's daughter, Genesis 36 and 35. Another is a Temanite, Husham, Genesis 36:34, a descendant of Esau's son, Teman or Teman, Genesis 36:10 and 11. None of these kings' sons became kings after their fathers died. Apparently, there was no familial royal line whereby sons of these post-Horite kings succeeded to the throne, but rather some other system was in place by which kings were either chosen or won the right to rule. Genesis 36:31 through 39. By the time governance of these peoples had been consolidated under kings instead of chiefs, Horites are no longer mentioned as such. The land of Seir, the Horite, had become known as Edom. The word Kori or Horite, Khry, in English is a transliteration of the Egyptian word Hryw. Hori means resident and is part of the Egyptian phrase Hori C, HRYW underscore S apostrophe Y. D2, D21 G43 N37 D36 Z4 N33 A49 Z3, which means resident of the sand or desert or Bedouin. The name Shi'er or Seir in English seems to be the same as the word Shi'ara in Arabic, and it means religious ceremony, rite, cultic practice. The plural is Sha'er, and it means places of worship, cultic shrines. Mount Seir was a location for the cultic shrines of both Yahweh and Kos, Qos. According to the Wikipedia article entitled Kos, M. Rose speculates that prior to Q's or Kos's advent, Edom worshipped Yahweh, a connection going back to the early Egyptian references to YWH in the land of Shasu. This is another case of personification of a geographical area into a biblical personage. Edom, aka Esau, is another example of Hebrew use of personification as a literary device. So, the Horites were indigenous Bedouin who occupied the area prior to the Egyptian colonization of the mining operations in that area. They were most likely local clans and tribes among whom could be counted the Midianites and other tribes whose origin was the Arabian Peninsula. The Edomites were the descendants of these local Bedouin who intermarried with Canaanite clans from the north. The biblical character Edom is a personification of the Edomites or the locals who eventually became the Judeans. The sixth king of Edom, Saul ben Qais, who was the first king of Judah. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, which means son of the south or Edom. Qais or Kesh is the dialectical pronunciation of Quash, who was the chief deity of Edom. By their own account, the Judeans were preceded by the Edomites. According to Genesis 36 and 1, Esau is Edom. Genesis 36 lists the kings of Edom who preceded the Judeans. These are the kings who ruled the land of Edom before a king ruled the children of Israel. And Bela ben Beor ruled in Edom, and the name of his city was Dinah. And Bela died, and Jobab ben Zerah from Basra ruled in his place. And Jobab died, and Husham of the land of Timnai ruled in his place. And Husham died, and Hadad ben Bedad, who struck Midian in the field of Moab, ruled in his place. And the name of his city was Abith. And Hadad died, and Samlah of Masrekah ruled in his place. And Samlah died, and Saul of Rehoboth on the river ruled in his place. And Saul died, and Baal Hanan ben Achbor ruled in his place. And Baal Hanan ben Achbor died, and Hadar ruled in his place, and the name of his city was Pau, P-A-U. And his wife's name was Mehetabel bat Matrid bat Mezahab. And these are the names of the clans of Esau by their families, by their places, by their names: Clan Timnah, Clan Alba, Clan Jetheth, Clan Aholabama, Clan Elah, Clan Penon, Clan Kenaz, Clan Teman, Clan Mibzar, Clan Magdiel, Clan Eram or Iram. Edom, known as YDWMA, I'm going to say Yidwama to the Egyptians, was dominated by the Egyptian between 1400 and 1200 BCE. Edom was the location of the copper mines where the Shasu of Yahweh, the Egyptian designation for the Bedouin occupants of Edom, were enslaved to mine, smelt, and forge copper. These Bedouin occupants included the offspring of the Edomites and Horites through their patriarchs, Esau and Seir. Seir is also the name of the mountainous region which demarcated the border between Judah and Edom. The religion of these Egyptian enslaved Bedouin was a mixture of ancient Semitic cults as that of Yahweh and the religion of their occupiers, the Egyptians. It is also well known that the Egyptian goddess Hathor was worshipped in the Timnah Valley in Edom. According to Wikipedia, Hathor, Egyptian HWT-HR in Greek, her name means mansion of Horus, is an ancient Egyptian goddess who personified the principles of joy, feminine love, and motherhood. She was one of the most important and popular deities throughout the history of ancient Egypt. Hathor was worshipped by royalty and common people alike, in whose tombs she is depicted as mistress of the West, welcoming the dead into the next life. In other roles, she was a goddess of music, dance, foreign lands, and fertility who helped women in childbirth, as well as the patron goddess of miners, Miners. Seir refers to the mountain of Edom, mountain in Edom, and it is the name of a Horite sheikh or sheikh who was either personified as Seir or shared the name with this location of cultic shrines. The word Timnah is also derived from an Egyptian word TNMET, X1-N35-M22-M22-N35-X1-01, which is a reference to the Hathor shrine located at Timnah. Evidently, the M and N were reversed when the word was written in Hebrew as TMNA. Timnah was the concubine to Esau's son Eliphaz in Genesis 25. So the Hebrews demoted Hathor to a concubine in their scripts. It is well known that Hathor was worshipped in the Timnah Valley as the goddess of the miners who labored in the valley's copper mines, so it should not surprise anyone that the divinities with whom she was associated, as Osiris, would find their way into biblical text as names of biblical characters as Esau, Edom, and Seir, the patriarch of the Horites. Genesis 25 describes the birth story of Esau and his twin Jacob. According to Genesis 25 and 25, the first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy S-A-R or Seir garment. So they named him Esau or ASW, Esau. And according to Genesis 36 and 20, these were the sons of Seir, or Sayr, the Horite, Hryw, who were living in the region. So the Hebrew authors of Genesis mistakenly thought that the name Esau derived from the word Sar or Sar, as did the word Seir, Sayr. According to Strong's Hebrew and Greek Dictionary 8181, both words derive from the same root meaning hairy in Hebrew. However, Esau's name derives from the Egyptian word saw, S-A-W, A47, G43, and it means herdsman, while Seir is a Semitic word which means places of worship, cultic shrines. Mount Seir was a place to worship Yahweh and then the Edomite god Kos. The Hebrew word for Horite is Khry, which is comparable to the English phrase HRYW S apostrophe Y, which means resident of the sand or Bedouin. The Kori were descendants of the local Bedouin known to the Egyptians as Hori C. Hathor, as has been demonstrated, is directly related to Edom, whose name derives from the Hebrew word DM, which means both blood and red. Esau, aka Edom, was described as covered with red hair, Genesis 25:25. Edom, besides being the name of Esau, was the land of the red, copper producing earth. Hathor was the goddess who presided over the copper mining operations from her temple in the Timnah Valley in Edom. Hathor was described as a cow goddess who was depicted in three forms: as a cow-headed human, and as a woman crowned with horns and a solar disk. In her human form, she was dressed in red or blue with a red sun disk between her horned crown. Hathor was robed in red to indicate her role as the copper goddess, and as the goddess of turquoise, she was dressed in blue. Hathor, the patron goddess of miners and minerals, especially copper, gold, turquoise, and malachite, was worshipped at Timnah between 1400 to 1200 BCE. She was also a goddess of incense. Myrrh was especially important to her. One of the renderings of her name in hieroglyphics is O6D2 D21 Z5 I12. The hieroglyph for I-12 is an erect cobra. At one time, the Proto-Judeans, Midianites, and Edomites, who were miners and caravan merchants that worked the mines at Timnah, may have considered her to be the consort of Yahweh. Yahweh's Hebrew consort was Asherah, a sea goddess, who was represented as a pole near the altars of Yahweh. Hathor's sacred tree was the sycamore tree. Hathor and Asherah became conflated into the goddess Ketesh, who is represented as a goddess holding a snake and wearing Hathor's signature wig, as well as Hathor's horned sun disk crown. Asherah may have supplanted Hathor Ketesh as Yahweh's consort after the Egyptians left the mines. However, Hathor's symbolic wooden pole seems to have become a symbol of Asherah, that is, until Josiah ejected this borrowed pole from the temple. So, the Proto-Judeans, or the Shasa of Yahweh, aka Hori C, worshiped both Yahweh, a copper viper, and his consort Ketesh, who, like her husband, was a divinity associated with copper and snakes. Hathor was an important deity to the Timnah Valley miners. When the Egyptians left the area, aspects of her worship were adapted into Jewish Levitical law regarding temple ritual. Hathor was a red cow goddess whom the Jews transformed into the sacred red heifer, whose blood and ashes sanctified the temple. according to Numbers 19, verses 2 through 8. This is a requirement of the law that the Lord has commanded. Tell the Israelites to bring you a red heifer without defect or blemish, and that has never been under a yoke. Give it to Eleazar the priest. It is to be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. Then Eleazar the priest is to take some of its blood on his finger and sprinkle it 7 times towards the front of the tent of meeting. While he watches, the heifer is to be burned, its hide, flesh, blood, and intestines. The priest is to take some cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool and throw them onto the burning heifer. After that, the priest must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. He may then come into the camp, but he will be ceremonially unclean till evening. The man who burns it must also wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he too will be unclean until evening. The sacrifice of a calf without blemish originated in Egypt. According to Herodotus, the Egyptian priests were very particular about the animals they sacrificed, and the ritual slaughter was laid down precisely. The males of the ox kind they consider to belong to Epaphos, and on account of him they test them in the following manner. If the priest sees one single black hair upon the beast, he counts it not clean for sacrifice. And one of the priests who is appointed for the purpose makes investigation of these matters, both when the beast is standing upright and when it is lying on its back, drawing out its tongue, moreover, to see if it is clean in respect of the appointed signs, which I shall tell of in another part of the history. He looks also at the hairs of the tail to see if it has them growing in a natural manner. And if it be clean in respect of all things, he marks it with a piece of papyrus, rolling this round the horns, and then when he has plastered sealing earth over it, he sets upon it the seal of his signet ring, and after that they take the animal away. But for one who sacrifices a beast not sealed, the penalty appointed is death. The article further relates that such a calf was offered to Isis in her form as a sacred cow. Cows or heifers were sacred to both Hathor and Isis. According to Hathor Wikipedia article, both Isis and Hathor were the mother of Horus, so the two goddesses were conflated. According to Jewish laws regarding the sacrifice of the red heifer, according to Mishnah Para, the presence of 2 black hairs invalidates a red heifer, in addition to the usual requirements of an unblemished animal for sacrifice. Furthermore, according to the Wikipedia Hathor article, Hathor may be the cow goddess who is depicted from an early date on the Narmer palette and on a stone urn dating from the first dynasty that suggests a role as sky goddess and a relationship to Horus, who, as a sun god, is housed in her. So the Egyptians viewed Hathor as the house of Horus. Furthermore, the same article further states, from the Old Kingdom, she was also called Lady of the Sycamore in her capacity as tree deity. Hathor as a sycamore tree explains the Asherah poles or groves described in biblical texts. Asherah originated as an Aegean goddess of the seas, but she was represented in Canaan and Judah as a wooden pole located in Yahweh's temple, as well as in various other places of worship. Hathor was worshipped in the Timnah Valley as a form of Asherah. When the Egyptians left the copper mines to the locals in 1200 BCE, the Bedouin demolished the cow image but retained the wooden pole, which became the symbol of Asherah in Judah. The Hathor Asherah poles were destroyed by the Judean king Josiah. However, her sacred animal, the red heifer, was used to sanctify Yahweh's temple, so the cult of the goddess remains alive and well to this day. According to the Temple Institute site, In our own times, the commandment of the red heifer takes on more and more significance, for without it, the divine service of the holy temple cannot be resumed. There is a spiritual renaissance today in Israel. After almost 2,000 years, Israel is clearly moving towards the time when the holy temple on Mount Moriah, the prophesied third temple, will be rebuilt. What does a red heifer have to do with any of this? Perhaps it would be difficult for some to believe that a cow could be so important. But in truth, the fate of the entire world depends on the red heifer. For God has ordained that its ashes alone are the single missing ingredient for the reinstatement of biblical purity and thereafter the rebuilding of the holy temple. And as we will discuss in these pages, the ashes of the red heifer rectifies humanity's most basic flaw, despair. The despair brought about by the loss of the temple and the divine presence amongst us. According to the Wikipedia Hathor article, the myth states that Ra communicated through Hathor's third eye, Mayat, and told her that some people in the land were planning to assassinate him. Hathor was so angry that the people she had created would be audacious enough to plan that she became Sekhmet, war goddess of Upper Egypt, to destroy them. Hathor, as Sekhmet, became bloodthirsty, and the slaughter was great because she could not be stopped. As the slaughter continued, Ra saw the chaos down below and decided to stop the bloodthirsty Sekhmet. So he poured huge quantities of blood-colored beer on the ground to trick Sekhmet. She drank so much of it, thinking it to be blood, that she became drunk and returned to her former gentle self as Hathor. It appears that certain radical Jewish fundamentalists in Palestine want to revive Hathor's image as the bloodthirsty war goddess who will wreak havoc in the name of her husband Yahweh, with whom she shared the temple in Jerusalem. The Jerusalem temple cult began in Edom in the Timnah Valley copper mines as a cult of copper miners. The biblical authors personified Edom as the character Esau. These same biblical authors proclaimed Yahweh as their sole deity after they expelled Hathor or Asherah from their temple. Yet the devotees of the modern day version of this ancient copper mining cult fully intended to use their ancient Egyptian goddess Hathor as a flaming signal signifying their declaration of a holocaust upon the native Palestinians who inhabited the area long before this Egyptian influenced mining cult became the official religion of the land. To further complicate matters are biblical passages in which the Jewish God Yahweh orders the slaughter of Goyim or non-Jews, according to 1 Samuel 15, 1 through 3. Saul said to Samuel, I am the one, the Lord Yahweh, sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. And according to 2 Kings 15:17, at that time, Menahem, a king of Judah, starting out from Tirzah, attacked Tipsah and everyone in the city and its vicinity because they refused to open their gates. He sacked Tipsah and ripped open all the pregnant women. The above commands to slaughter innocent non-combatants, including newborn infants, and rip open the wombs of pregnant women have been carried out by the heads of state of Israel even before Israel became a recognized political entity. Elected prime ministers who participated in this brand of terrorism, which included genocidal campaigns against the Palestinians as well as systematic ethnic cleansing, were David Ben-Gurion, he commanded the ethnic cleansing of 750,000 Arabs during the destruction of hundreds of Palestinian villages in 1948. Levi Eshkol, he presided over the ethnic cleansing of 250,000 Palestinians. Menachem began, he was the preeminent terrorist in the Middle East who instigated the Deir Yassin massacres. Ben Gurion and Eshkol managed to surpass him as top terrorists. Ariel Sharon, a murderous war hawk, he was responsible for massacres at Kibya, Sabra, and Shatila. Benjamin Netanyahu, he was responsible for the deaths and mutilations of thousands of children during Operations Cast Lead, Pillar of Defense, and Protective Edge. Yitzhak Shamir, he led British and Swedish nobles murdered for seeking to have Arabs treated as equals of Jews. Ehud Barak, a cross-dressing assassin, he participated in death squads that killed women, policemen, and a poet known as the Conscience. Golda Meir, she threatened to destroy the world with nukes during a BBC interview and more than once insisted that Palestinians did not exist as a people. Shimon Peres, he aggressively pursued nuclear weapons and succeeded in delivering them. Yitzhak Rabin, he signed an order for the children of Lydda to be ethnically cleansed quickly without attention to age. Yigal Allen, he served in special night squads which tortured and killed without compunction. Ehud Olmert, he presided over the 2006 invasion of Lebanon, which killed 1,300 people and displaced more than 1 million others. Moshe Sharat, number 13, he was a staunch proponent of compulsory population transfer or ethnic cleansing. It is really tragic that that an ancient idolatrous cult can be called upon as an excuse to violate every humane law that expounds human rights, human dignity, freedom, and self-determination. Hathor, the red heifer, should be buried forever in the red, copper-producing earth of Edom. Now, back to Jephthah. Okay, so Jephthah appears in the book of Judges as a judge who presided over Israel for a period of 6 years. Judges 12 and 7. According to Judges, he lived in Gilead. His father's name is also given as Gilead, and as his mother is described as a prostitute, this may indicate that his father might have been any of the men of that area. Jephthah led the Israelites in battle against Ammon, and in exchange for defeating the Ammonites, made a vow to sacrifice whatever would come out of the door of his house first. When his daughter was the first to come out of the house, he immediately regretted the vow, which bound him to sacrifice his daughter to God. Jephthah carried out his vow. Traditionally, Jephthah ranks among the major judges because of the length of the biblical narrative referring to him, but his story also shares features with those of the minor judges, such as his short tenure, only 6 years in office. The story of Jephthah is found in the book of Judges, chapters 11 and 12. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of the Philistines and into the hand of the Ammonites. Jephthah, having been born illegitimately, is driven out by his half brothers and takes up his dwelling in Tob, east of Gilead. Outlaws collected around Jephthah and went raiding with him. The elders of Gilead asked him to be their leader in the campaign against the Ammonites, but he holds out for a more permanent and a broader position and the elders agree that, provided Jephthah succeeds in defeating Ammon, he will be their permanent chieftain. On behalf of Israel as a whole and in reliance on the might of God, the judge Jephthah challenges the Ammonites. Jephthah swears an oath, and whatever or whoever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it or him up for a burnt offering. Judges 11:31. The victorious Jephthah is met on his return by his only child, a daughter. Jephthah tears his clothes and cries, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, but it is bound by his vow. I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow." The girl asks for 2 months' grace, that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity. And so Jephthah did with her according to his vow that he had made. The story ends by recounting how the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in the year. Later, Jephthah was forced to fight against the Ephraimites, who refused to aid him in his struggle against the Ammonites. The story is remembered for the killing of the fugitive Ephraimites, who were identified by their accent. They said the Hebrew word shibboleth as Sibboleth. At that time, 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. Judges 12:5-6. Jephthah is referenced once in the epistle to the Hebrews 11:32, where he is commended for his faith. Sacrifice of daughter. Jephthah's sacrifice of his daughter stands in stark contrast to the binding of Isaac in the book of Genesis, in which Abraham was about to perform a divinely ordered sacrifice of his son when an angel of God directly intervened and stopped the sacrifice. Some writers have observed that the Israelites of the time were decidedly barbarous, that Mosaic law, which forbade human sacrifice, was at this time widely disrespected, and that there are several other examples of rash vows to God with similarly terrible consequences. David Jansen argued that the story was an integral part of the Deuteronomist picture of moral decline through adoption of non-Israelitic practices such as child sacrifice. Solomon Landers believed that the absence of express judgment implies that the sacrifice was not acceptable to God, notwithstanding the fact that the sacrifice nevertheless happened. The book of Judges has been seen as teaching a cycle of pride. Excuse the devil. Like it's a whole parking lot over there, and they come sit right in front of me. The book of Judges has been seen as teaching a cycle of pride associated with rejection of God's law and subsequent suffering of the people. Suedo Philo's Liber Antiquitatum Biblicarum gives a name for Jephthah's daughter, Selah, or Seila. Her character is elaborated and emphasized. The author has done his utmost to put this woman on the same level as the patriarchs, in this case, especially Isaac. John Chrysostom held that God allowed Jephthah to kill his daughter in order to prevent similar rash vows being made in the future, and that it was for that purpose that the annual bewailing of the event took place as a constant reminder. Ambrose cited the story as an example of how it is sometimes contrary to duty to fulfill a promise or to keep an oath. The Talmud characterizes Yiftach or Jephthah as a person of poor judgment who makes unfitting vows without proper consideration for consequences. Bereshit Rabbah 60:3. The Midrash Tanhuma Bekukotai 7 asserts that if Jephthah had read the laws of vows in the Torah, he would not have lost his daughter. The rabbis also ascribed Jephthah's death to his actions as punishment. Jephthah's penalty consists of the shedding of his limbs, which are buried in numerous places, as is learned from Judges 12 and 7. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died, and he was buried in the towns of Gilead. One limb would slough away and be buried in one location, and then another would fall off somewhere else and be buried there. Rashi also quotes the Midrash Rabbah saying that he was punished for not going to the high priest to get the vow annulled, and was afflicted with an illness that caused his limbs to decompose off of his body, at which point it would be buried where it fell, thereby explaining the verse that said he was buried in the cities as opposed to city of Gilead. According to some rabbinical commentators, Phinehas also sinned by failing to address the needs of relieving Jephthah of his vow to sacrifice his daughter. As consequence, the high priesthood was taken from him and temporarily given to the offspring of Ithamar, essentially Eli and his sons. Since at least the 12th or 13th century, Jewish scholars, among them the compiler and summarizer David Kimhi, 1160 through 1235, and Levi ben Gershon, 1288 through 1344, have taken fulfillment of Jephthah's vows as meaning that he only kept her in seclusion. This view is put forward also by Christian scholars from the 14th century and continues to be propounded today, as by Solomon Landers, who considers it most likely that the fate of Jephthah's daughter was perpetual virginity or solitary confinement. Ethelbert William Bullinger looks at the word "and" in Jephthah's vow, Judges 11:31. Whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. As he explains, the Hebrew prefix I, that is, or whatever, that is translated in the above passage as "and" is often used as a disjunctive and means "or" when there is a second preposition. Indeed, this rendering is suggested in the margin of the A.V. Bullinger goes on to give examples from the Bible where the same word has been translated as "or." According to him, the right translation of this passage is "Whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, or I will offer it up as a burnt offering." Jephthah's daughter, being the first that came out of the house, was thus, according to Bullinger, dedicated to God. He also says, in any case, it should have been unlawful and repugnant to Jehovah to offer a human being to him as a burnt offering for his acceptance. Such offerings were common to heathen nations at that time, but it is noteworthy that Israel stands out among them with this great peculiarity that human sacrifices were unknown in Israel. However, in the Hebrew Bible, the same word for burnt offering, Hebrew, olah, or oleh, O-L-A-H, used in reference to Jephthah and his daughter in Judges 11:31, is also used in other biblical stories alluding to human sacrifice, such as the story of Abraham and Isaac, Genesis 22, and Mesha of Moab and his son, 2 Kings 3:27. Moreover, an ole or olah in the Hebrew Bible exemplifies a pure gift to the deity. Thus, Jephthah is not stating an alternative between dedicating something to God and offering it up as a burnt offering, but clearly linking the two. Adam Clarke's commentary has an exposition of the issues at stake in this passage and contends that the vow Jephthah made was not as rash as it sounds. The Order of the Eastern Star refers to her as Ada. Possible origins. Israel Finkelstein has suggested that behind multiple and large-scale Deuteronomistic and post-Deuteronomistic additions and redactions, there may lie an oral story which reflects a conflict on the boundary between Israelite and Ammonite settlements in Transjordan around the towns of Gilead and Mizpah. It may have been first written down in the 8th century BCE when the northern kingdom of Israel or Samaria began to collect its heroic tales, royal stories, and foundation myths. Finkelstein has also suggested that the story of Jephthah's vow may have been added into the story as late as the Hellenistic period. The 18th century French philosopher Voltaire, citing the 2nd century BC writer Apollodorus, noted the similarities between Jephthah and the mythical Cretan general Idomeneus. Speculating whether one story had in fact imitated the other, Idomeneus had asked the gods to calm a storm, promising in return that he would sacrifice the first living thing he saw upon his return, which turned out to be his son. The story of Jephthah's daughter is also sometimes compared to that of Agamemnon's daughter Iphigenia. In his play Jephthah's Civ Votum, Jephthah or the Vow, the Scottish scholar and dramatist George Buchanan, 1506 to 1582, called Jephthah's daughter Iphis, obviously alluding to Iphigenia, and Handel's 1751 oratorio Jephthah, based on Buchanan's play, uses the same. Cultural influence. The story of Jephthah has influenced a number of literary works. Historia de Jephthah, an oratorio by Giacomo Carissimi; Jephthah's Civ Votum, a tragedy by George Buchanan, 1554; Jephthah of Offerbeloft, a play by Joos van del Vondel, 1659, a reworking in Dutch of the play by Buchanan; Two Treatises of Government, a political and theological book, John Locke, 1689, challenging the divine rights of kings, using Jephthah to demonstrate his appeal to heaven for changing government by the use of force in the absence of an earthly authority to petition it. See Book 2, Section 21. This concept is extremely important in First Amendment jurisprudence and is one of the strongest arguments against temporary restraining orders that enjoin speech, also known as a prior restraint, because of how dangerous they are. See, for example, Milk Wagon Drivers versus Meadowmore Diaries or Meadowmore Dairies Incorporated, 312 U.S. 287 293 1941. Jephthah Tragedy, 1703, by Charles Piori; Jephthah, an opera by Michel Pignolet de Montclair, 1732; Jephthah, the oratorio by George Frederick Handel, 1751; Songs from Oratorio of Jephthah by John H. Hewitt, 1845; Jephthah's Galuved, a opera on the story by Meyerbeer; The Vow, an opera by Colin McAlpin. The story of Jephthah and his daughter is the subject of Lion Feuchtwanger's historical novel, Jephthah and C.N. Tochter, 1957, English translation, Jephthah and his daughter, also known as Jephthah and his daughter, published in 1958. In Hamlet, Polonius tells Hamlet, "If you called me Jephthah, my lord, I have a daughter I love passing well." The 2015 winner of the BP Portrait Award, Annabelle and Guy by Machan Ben Kanan, was inspired by the story of Jephthah and his daughter. The 2008 novel Ever by Gail Carson Levine is based on the story of Jephthah's daughter. Judges 1134 is quoted in the foreword, and the plot follows the story of a girl in a Bronze Age Middle Eastern inspired society whose father promises to sacrifice to his god the first person who congratulates him on his wife's recovery from an illness. And that is that on Jephthah. Next, we will be going over the the Eastern Stars. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Peace.